Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, everybody. You are tuned into Normal, and today we've got a special guest. She doesn't need an introduction.
Suspect. Suspect. How are you doing, Suspect?
No, I am good. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I'm fine. And how are you?
No, I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm happy. We just concluded a deal today and it's really fun, man. Happy days. Happy days. So, Suspect, we were actually speaking about the flip strategy and also the back to back strategy. And this is when you told me that with flip and back to back, it's one and the same thing. However, the process is not the same, right? So, could we start it at the most basic form? What is flipping a property?
Before we actually get into that, Suspect, when you are running the numbers with us and concluding this deal, it's actually amazing. We're always speaking about numbers, we're always calculating them through a spreadsheet. However, when you broke everything down in terms of this deal, it actually brought them to life. And it shows that whatever that you're doing, you really need to be informed, because we've sat with countless of property investors or aspiring property investors that do not understand the back office. So I'm quite excited about this, Suspect.
Yes, thank you, guys. When we talk about flipping and when we talk about back to back, we're definitely talking about the same thing. So the only difference is that some of the property investors, they would want to renovate the property and then after that market it, and then they would market the property after they've taken transfer of the property. But some of the other guys, they would want everything to be done simultaneously, and when doing that, it's important then, what I would stress to property investors, that make sure that the first OTP that you sign, that is between yourself and the owner of the property, that the conveyancer that you will appoint must have a sight of that OTP, so that firstly we know how much you bought the property for. You know how much is outstanding, if there are levies on the levies, if there are rates on the rates. And as well, is there anything, or maybe is it not a distressed property whereby the owner of the property is unable to repay bonds? So you need to be sure, obviously, when we are talking about numbers, those are the things that you have to make sure that you are aware of them before you conclude the OTP. Then on conclusion of the OTP, then you give that OTP before you sign it to your conveyancer, so that your conveyancer should be able to timeline it, especially if you want to do simultaneous transfer, because I have to make sure that the suspensive clause or the exit clause that are on the first OTP, they will be in line with your marketing. So meaning, when you market you market a property knowing for a fact that you have given how much time on the first transaction, because you don't want this as a situation where, because there's a suspensive condition, then it lapses automatically, and then in that case you won't be able to proceed with marketing.
I see. I see. So now looking at that particular strategy, right, of back to back, how would it then work with somebody that, say, for instance, somebody wasn't able to do their bond payments, right? And now the bank is saying that if you don't sell, we're going to repossess your property. So now, how does that work with a back to back deal? Because now I must imagine that whilst you're still renovating, the person might be afraid that the property will actually be repossessed during the process. So now, is it a point whereby me as a property investor, I need to start paying their bond on a month to month basis so that
It
the
doesn't get
property doesn't get
repossessed.
repossessed?
No, 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 not necessarily. Actually, that is why it's important for you to have within your power team to have your legal person, because what is important with that as well is that, should it happen that the owner of the property is unable to pay the bond repayments, then at least you have the OTP as the conveyancer. Then you are in a position to communicate with the bank and inform the bank that, bank, please note, this property has now been sold, and then the bank will obviously pend their proceedings. On pending the proceedings, obviously the banks usually, they don't just pend, they would pend if there is some, because they would ask me if there is a bond granted already. And obviously, as a conveyancer, I already know that this person is not going to provide for a guarantee. This person is marketing the property
Yes.
to get a buyer. So then in that case, I am able to play around in terms of trying to convince the bank to pend their proceedings, so that I can accommodate your period of marketing your property to obtain a new buyer.
And all of this this is done legally, right?
It is done legally, obviously. It's all about playing, because what is important again is, should you be able to communicate earlier, or should you be able to share the OTP with your conveyancer earlier, then it's easier for the conveyancer to be able to convince whichever parties that will be involved in the transaction, so that at least, because the most important thing is to make sure that the transaction is concluded and everyone is happy.
I can't actually remove myself being a property investor, because I'm listening to you, Sispet, and I'm thinking about what is the worst case scenario. Because every time I'm put in a situation, I'm asking myself, what is the worst case scenario? Because it's not as simple as one can say that, okay, I'll just do a back to back and get money out of this deal. So I'm already thinking at it from a perspective whereby if it wasn't bought below market value, as you did mention, now I'm in a situation whereby I actually put my money in as a property investor. All the renovations were done, only to find out that they were done to a point whereby if we were to sell, we were going to sell higher than the average, of which it might be a problem because maybe the market is not willing to buy it at that price. And then we have to factor in all these costs. So that's just something that I took out from what you were saying.
What is important again, it goes back to a power team, because in a power team you have non-wealth, and non-wealth is there to do the numbers. The minute you have the numbers correct, then that's where you involve the legal person, because you don't get to the point where you discuss the signing of the contract before you get your numbers right. So you need to get your numbers right first before you get to even negotiate a sale agreement.
I mean, suspect we were in a situation whereby somebody reached out to us, and I really don't want somebody to find themselves in this case whereby, let's say the property was 1 million, they negotiated it to 950, and then they flipped, they put all their resources in, only to find out that when it's coming to sell again after 6 months, they could only sell it at 900. So how does one actually, it's a mess. I can't even ask you, how does
You
one
know
actually
what?
maneuver around such?
Most of the time, it's like I was explaining to one to our agent, that before we talk about whether we can have clients coming to sign documents. So it's important for me to firstly, if there is an existing bond, to obtain the figures from the bank, so I can make sure that this person has not sold the property at a loss. I have had transactions where the bank is asking more than what the property is sold for. So then for me, it's important to make sure that there is, because I need to inform you earlier in the transaction that, hey, please note that this transaction is not going to proceed, purely because the amount that the bank is asking for is very high. Unless, again, if the owner of the property is able or is in a position to sign an acknowledgement of debt with the bank, whereby the difference, then it won't be a problem. Because there are those cases where acknowledgement of debt is signed for the balance.
So just to wrap up my question, you did answer it, and I just want to put it out there that so there is a possibility whereby somebody can buy a property with the intention to flip or even back to back, only to find themselves in debt after that property.
True.
So now, I think the question that I have, right, is that, say, for instance, the property is actually selling at 900, and now the person is actually owing 950,000. What then happens if the person doesn't have the 50,000 to actually
The
supplement?
50,000.
Does the offer to purchase become cancelled, or do we just go through and then?
I've heard a number of those scenarios, and what is important again is that, firstly, there is a clause on many OTPs where it says the seller acknowledges that the purchase price covers the bond, covers the agent's commission, will cover the rates and whatever. So it's important to understand that OTP as well. Hence, we always stress the understanding of the OTP before you sign it, so that you know those terms and those conditions. So what is important again is, should there be that kind of scenario, then as a conveyancer, then I'll have to liaise with all parties. Here's the situation. We have a situation where the bond is asking more than what the property is sold for. So what I usually do is, because obviously the buyer will still be willing to buy the property, and the seller will still be willing to sell the property, then I will negotiate with the agents. Agents, are you able to reduce your commission? I will negotiate, or you can't negotiate with the municipality. I will negotiate with the body corporate. If there is, are you able to reduce your levies, the amount that is required? If maybe the client is owing maybe a high amount on levies, So with that, then I would find a way of having the transaction concluded, because both parties are still willing to have a transaction concluded. But again, if I fail, then it depends on the parties then if they want to cancel and not proceed with the transaction.
Invest like a pro with no wealth. What can you do to improve your credit score to qualify for a property? I'm sure you've heard of good versus bad credit and would definitely like to find out how that affects your property portfolio. Do you want to know the relationship between credit, property investing, financial management, and generational wealth? This is an event to not be missed. We will be unpacking all the questions previously asked. Invest like a pro with no wealth.